If you tuned into the Final Fantasy XIV FanFest or glimpsed any of the promotional material from their channels lately, you'll know that a new expansion has been announced and sweeping gameplay changes are in store for the award-winning MMO with the free trial up to Shadowbringers? Gotta update the meme. But there is one reveal that had players a bit worried. Namely, 2 new gameplay modes. Reborn mode, which is the classical button setup, and Evolved mode, which is the new optimized button setup, which is funny in a way. FanFest happened while I was in the middle of taking a break and working on details of my video essay about FF14 gameplay, writing about a subject only for them to turn around and change the content right after said video came out so it's irrelevant immediately. Couldn't be me. This sent me back to the proverbial drawing board for this essay and left me to think over FF14 gameplay as a whole. How it exists now, how it might change going forward. There are so many potential changes and there is a lot to consider. So let's talk in depth about these gameplay changes for Final Fantasy XIV, shall we? I'm going to start by asking a simple question. If I went up to a random person on the street and said, you have 5 seconds to tell me what this does or you're going to perish, how many of them do you think would get it correct? Half? None? Well, too bad for them, too much time already passed and they have done a perish anyway. This is what Final Fantasy XIV was like for a long time as a new player starting out. It seemed like the game was more about trial and error, doing content and remembering the stuff that it threw at you regardless of how obtuse it is, and then doing it differently a second time. This acceptance of there being so many convoluted mechanics was so widespread that the adage at the time was you really need to start playing this game with a friend so they can walk you through all this. I remember starting this game from the perspective of a new player, unfamiliar with the realm of MMOs, but entrenched in Final Fantasy games since I was a wee bab. And I felt so confused and overwhelmed with the sheer amount of everything. Why were classes called something different here? And then Pokemon evolve into something later, but only some of them. What is this? Why is this? Why is there 1,000 menus? And granted, if you were there when the old scriptures were written and you played the game for a long time or similar games, these were common knowledge. You had a long time to figure out how this game worked and were able to gradually accept things as they were made. For new players though, this was a problem. Imagine it. You are new to Final Fantasy XIV. You got to the end of A Realm Reborn and you were about to undertake a dungeon called Praetorium. It has 8 people. You're nervous. And as soon as the dungeon starts, everyone bolts for a teleport point you don't even know exists. They teleport and you're left to fend for yourself. But you can't, because everyone pulled a mob of enemies and instantly teleported away, leaving you to die, and they don't know you're alone long enough to teleport, so you die. Then you respawn. You don't know where anyone is, and are left to wander. A cutscene starts. What the fuck is happening? The cutscene ends with the fight starting. You try to find the party, but can't. Then you're teleported into the middle of the fight, which immediately ends, and everyone darts for a lift on the far side of the arena, takes it down without waiting for you, and you're so confused at this point. This was the experience for new players in this specific dungeon. It was overwhelming, it was confusing, it was stressful because you didn't know what was happening, and no one explained anything to you. For players who had done this for years, this was just another run of using a strategy that the community had for a long time found to be the most efficient. But for new players, you didn't know what the fuck was happening. You can see how there might be a divide here. It seems like the game devs realized this, and in the past few years they've been making changes to the game to make it more accessible to new players. They've streamlined dungeons like the aforementioned Praetorium to make it easier for new players to keep up. Tutorials to tell them what the hecky this is, menu pop-up windows to get basic information when new meters showed up, and my absolute favorite, literal confirmation windows that you have to check a box to confirm that you read it and understand it all. It's very adorable. They assume we read. Readability of new mechanics have also become more refined. See, you see these 2 mechanics, they're fundamentally the same. All you have to do is look away. In this one, at the beginning of the game, there is almost no forecast for it. You have to do it wrong, and then do it better later. But later you get this nice little icon, and bam, boom, you know what to do. Dawn Trail's all the implementation of a lot of these sort of improvements. Sometimes in the form of text on screen, other tells are more creative. You get the picture. Now, this does have the downside of making some content feel exceptionally easy now. I don't die in Praetorium due to legacy strats because I don't know how to do the teleport skip into 360 no-scope. I just disassociate now for 20 minutes and the dungeon finishes itself and I basically almost have to do nothing. But That shines a light on the idea that dying in order to increase difficulty is not great. Just like the games of yore that were so obtuse and needlessly difficult to artificially inflate the hours that you put into this garbage in order to progress. How far we've come. But this is the game design puzzle. How do you make something accessible for new players and not boring to veteran players? It takes a lot of thought, trial, error, and frankly luck sometimes to make it work. These types of issues are what the gameplay changes that have been recently announced are meant to address. Simplifying it for new players who are overwhelmed by the number of commands, but also try and integrate role distinction and class uniqueness for each class. This is a great idea on its face. A common complaint that I see is that gameplay is beginning to feel homogenous between classes, and that there is very little amount of uniqueness between them. This is also a lampshaded strategy to future-proof the game, but I'll get into that later. The plan is to create a new gameplay mode with a new control scheme called Evolve Mode, which will feature simplified button schemes and situational gameplay. This means, for example, if you have a 1-2-3 combo split between 3 buttons, now it's just one button that you can press 3 times, which eliminates the need for the 2 additional buttons on your bar. It also means that your button will change functions depending on situations like how close you are to a boss or who you have targeted. This feels reminiscent of fighting games, where they have a control scheme for new players which provides automatic combos or easier button chains, which automatically triggered my concern that they were creating a press X to win scenario. That's not the case. They gave a demonstration of a few choice classes with this new control scheme, and I'm not gonna lie, there were points where you could feel the silence from the audience. Oh, it was not great. Many people in the audience and within the live stream did warm up to the idea after some of the demonstration, but I don't envy those who were presenting this. I'll give a few of my thoughts and observation using White Mage, specifically because I do more healing than other classes. The largest change they highlighted is they will not be requiring most cast times on damage spells. So White Mage is able to do damage while moving much easier and presumably clip damage into healing spell casts. They will also be implementing more ways to do damage, such as stacking a charge for every time a cure spell is cast. How this looks in application seems to be that the player casts a cure spell, they gain a stack of damage and a meter, and then they can cash this out for additional damage. Interestingly, you can see here that it calculates them individually instead of providing a damage multiplier. This is a little weird to me. It's weird in the sense that they keep talking about how they want to have White Mage prioritize healing, and that healers, their priority is healing the party, but at the same time, they're talking mostly about damage dealing and cast times and buffing damage and making it easier to attack. Like, my guy, not helping the greed DPS allegations. I know there's someone out there thinking the words damage is mitigation, actually, and yes, that is true. However, all the DPS in the world isn't gonna stop people from eating shit, so I need a solution to that problem more so than the damage problem. When you're healing as a White Mage, a lot of your decision making with what healing spells to use depends on time and movement. If you have time before an incoming attack, you might choose a slower healing spell to save the quicker ones for when you need them immediately. Or you might use an OGCD spell while moving because you need to get out of a mechanic and someone ate shit. There comes a point where you generally deprioritize most of your healing moveset that requires you to stand and cast because instant healing is just useful and allows for free movement. I see people go as far as to remove buttons like Cure completely from their bar because after a point, they just don't use them. Which is not great design, so I see where they're coming from with this change. What they're doing is trying to incentivize players to use cures that can be cast in order to stack damage buffs, and potentially other skills we don't quite know yet. They do have something similar to this now where you cast Cure and get a potential pop of Cure 2 for free, but the heal is so not worth it past a point and therefore pretty worthless. They're trying to give you a risk and reward with this change, which I like. I like risking it for the bisking it. We also have something similar to this in the form of how Afflatus Misery works, which provides damage for healing with lilies, albeit a slightly different way of going about the same thing. But let's look at the bar and see what potential changes we can glean. Divine Benison is missing, but that's combined with Aquaveil into one button right here. Assize, Asylum, Regen, Presence of Mind, Dia, Thin Air, and our lilies are also missing in action. But more importantly,
my guy Repose? Rescue? Oh no!
My guess is that some of these are combined with other buttons, but others I'm less sure about. Lilies are especially strange in not being here. Currently you enter a content with fully charged meter and lilies, and you should have access to them right away, but we don't see them here. That may be for development reasons, since the gauge is clearly visible on this build. They may not have the final assets or implementation in just yet. I'm not convinced that they've been deleted as much as moved or waiting to show it, so that's fine. Overall, healer focus on prioritizing skills with cast times in order to do damage has me a little concerned. I get healer ley lines in the future. If you have no interest in these previous changes and all this just sucks to you, the good news is that you can still play the previous button setup in the reborn mode, which is the classical button setup mode, and play as you please. However, all the new jobs from this point on will only have the evolved mode. Not to be a doomer, but I think this does feel similar to how companies sunset a feature. First they add a new feature, but give you the chance to still use the old thing, but make the old thing unavailable on new content. Then, after a while, the old thing is half made into the new thing anyway, so why keep it around? Which, from a development standpoint, I do understand. Then it's only a matter of time before every class is going to become half-evolved mode anyway. But the old buttons could also easily become impractical too if they keep adding more and more and more. Since they are planning 10 more years of content, that's 10 more years of skills, 10 more years of MSQ, 10 more years of classes, 10 more years of adding buttons. This expansion, going back to the White Mage example, they added 3 buttons, but avoided bloat by rolling them into other skills, just like they're doing with the new mode anyway. But the previous expansion had 2 additional buttons. So, assuming this is the worst case scenario and we get 5 more expansions with 2 buttons each, that's 10 more buttons that you have to cram into this UI, and then your buttons are all UI, and then your screen is all UI. I can't blame them for looking at future-proofing something they intend on keeping around that long so the screen doesn't end up looking like this. I can't see them putting effort into supporting the Reborn mode if they're not taking the time to make specific Reborn models for the new classes. And this isn't me dogging on the new changes, since I do think they look neat and I'm really curious to see how they work and I want to try them and see how they feel. It's just certain sensibilities going, hey, managing 2 completely different game systems would be a massive amount of work. All in all, game development is one of those strange and wonderful mediums where the feel of something matters a lot. How does this feel to play? And I think none of us know how this feels to play, except Yoshi P, and he seemed pretty eager to actually get in his hands and play it when it was on screen, so I feel like that's a good sign. But gameplay feel is going to matter a lot, and ultimately, I just really want to get it in my hands and see how it feels, and see how it plays, before I make any judgments other than, this button is missing, this button is not. So, we'll see how it turns out. Change is inevitable and scary. Sometimes things we assume will be there forever can change on a whim. We don't expect these sort of things to happen, but as time moves on and the world moves with it, things that were once a perfect fit just don't work the same way anymore. So it goes. Progress, therefore, becomes an inevitability. As much as I enjoy Final Fantasy XIV, I think change is necessary to keep the game interesting, functional, and a realistic expenditure of time in the current gaming landscape. Do I think that these changes are going to work perfectly out of the box? I have no idea. That will remain to be seen once we get the Evercold expansion in our hands and we're able to try it for ourselves. I do, however, think some sort of change is necessary to keep the game thriving for the next 10 years that they're planning. So, here's to the next 10 years. All we can do is hope that they're good ones.